Can a single moment break your heart and awaken your strength? In a quiet corner of the city of Willowridge, under the fading glow of twilight, Clara Whitmore stepped into an opulent hotel suite. Her pulse raced. Not from the weight of her pregnancy, though she was 7 months along, but from a fear she couldn't name, a truth she hadn't yet accepted. Something was wrong. The suite was golden, silent, too perfect, and then she saw it. Her husband, Nathan, standing across the room, holding a single red rose. But the rose wasn't for her. His eyes weren't searching for her. He was gazing into another woman's face softly, sweetly, intimately. Clara froze. Her heart didn't shatter with noise. It cracked in silence. In that still, cruel moment, everything she believed about love began to unravel. Clara didn't come from wealth. She was raised on the outskirts of Willowridge, in a weathered blue house with creaky stairs and a garden that bloomed stubbornly every spring. Her parents had little, but they gave much. They taught her that kindness was currency, that patience could build bridges, and that love, true love, was a choice you made every single day. She was the oldest of three, a second mother in everything but name. She learned to carry others before she ever learned to carry herself. And when she dreamed of love, she dreamed of someone who would walk beside her, not ahead, not behind, someone who saw partnership not as a prize, but a promise. Nathan Pierce was not born into that same kind of world. He was the only son of a powerful family. Luxury was his default, not his desire. His parents owned a fleet of high-end car dealerships across the country, and Nathan had never known a need unmet. As a boy, he was nicknamed the Duke by his classmates, both for his polished manners and his air of quiet entitlement. Though he played humble, he wore the name like a badge. By the time he attended Preston Ridge University, he'd grown into that nickname. He believed doors would open simply because he stood in front of them. That success, and maybe even love, was his by right. Their worlds collided at a charity gala hosted for St. Adelaide's Children's Clinic. Clara was there as a volunteer, hair tucked loosely behind her ears, focus sharp on the raffle table. She managed. She wasn't there to impress anyone, least of all men like Nathan. But he noticed her. Not just the way she looked, but the way she was calm, present, filled with a kind of light that couldn't be faked. He approached, expecting charm to lead the way. But Clara didn't melt. She asked him thoughtful questions about the clinic, about whether his interest was surface or sincere. And something shifted in Nathan. For once, someone saw past the polish, past the Pierce name. She asked about his beliefs. He listened to hers. By the end of the night, he found himself wanting to know her, not just win her. Clara had never believed in fairy tales, but that night felt close. She didn't know then, standing behind that raffle table, that the same man who once made her believe in extraordinary love would be the one to test everything she knew about heartbreak, betrayal, and resilience. Nathan, ever the showman, had tried to impress Clara by offering to buy an outrageous number of raffle tickets. It was meant to be a grand gesture, a splash of wealth in a pool of goodwill. But Clara only smiled, gently shaking her head, aching. Maybe save some of that generosity for when the cameras aren't watching, she said, her voice soft but certain. That quiet challenge did something to him. She wasn't like the others who giggled at his extravagance or clung to his surname. She stood her ground with warmth, but also with integrity. And that, more than anything, lit a spark in him. By the end of the evening, Nathan knew he couldn't walk away from her without a connection. Summoning more vulnerability than he was used to, he asked if he could call her sometime. Clara, who had felt a quiet flicker of curiosity since their first conversation, gave him her number without hesitation. There was something about him, something unpolished beneath the polish that intrigued her. Their relationship unfolded quickly, as if their lives had been waiting to intertwine. Nathan brought her flowers, yes, but more importantly, he showed up. He spent evenings in her modest apartment, eating leftover pasta and laughing with her younger siblings. He offered to drive her mother to the farmer's market on weekends. And Clara, in return, gave him something he hadn't known he needed: a space to exhale, to be human, to lay down the weight of legacy for just a moment. In her presence, he didn't have to be the heir to an empire. He could just be Nathan, and that simplicity calmed the storms inside him. Clara listened when he spoke of tense board meetings and the pressure of being groomed to run a business that had been built long before he was born. She didn't offer solutions, just presence, and sometimes that was enough. 4 months after they met, under a sky painted in city lights, Nathan got down on one knee at the overlook near Lake Arden, a place Claire had once told him felt like home. She gasped, tears welling up before the words even came. It was fast, wildly fast. But in her heart, it felt like truth, so she said yes. Their wedding was a spectacle, a cathedral of crystal and candlelight, orchestrated by Nathan's parents, down to the last gold-embossed napkin. Clara's family stood in awe, proud and wide-eyed, grateful to see their daughter celebrated. For a while, everything felt like a dream, stitched together with silk and hope. But even dreams cast shadows. Nathan's temper had always lived just beneath the surface, and now it began to show. When things didn't go as planned, frustration erupted. He could be cold, dismissive, as though their marriage, their love, was another item on his list of achievements, a symbol of success rather than a living, breathing bond. Clara noticed, but she brushed the doubts aside. She believed in commitment, in forgiveness, in weathering storms. She told herself that love meant enduring even the rough edges, especially when those edges were born from stress, not cruelty. For a time, they seemed unshakable. Clara grew close to Nathan's parents, particularly his mother, who called her the calm in the chaos. She attended charity galas, garden brunches, and wine-soaked networking events she'd never imagined herself part of. It wasn't her world, but she adapted. She did it for Nathan, for their future, for the child they someday dreamed of. She believed that with love, anything could be softened. Even when she saw Nathan snap at a waiter or speak too sharply to his staff, she rationalized it. He was under pressure. He carried more than he showed. Surely, with time, he would learn gentleness, but deep down, a small voice began to whisper. Something didn't feel right, and that voice would soon grow louder. There was a time when Nathan never missed a chance to check in, when even the smallest delay warranted a quick call or a sweet text. But lately, silence had crept in. More and more, he arrived home long past midnight, muttering something vague about last-minute meetings or clients who wouldn't stop talking over dinner. Clara told herself it was just a phase, that the business was growing and he was under pressure. But something had shifted, something she couldn't quite name. Whenever she asked for details, his answers were thin and slippery, like water running through her hands. He would change the subject, or worse, brush her off with a tired smile. Then came the phone. Nathan had never been possessive with his devices. He used to leave them on the kitchen counter, sometimes forgotten on the couch. But now, it was always within arm's reach, always face down. He even took it with him into the shower. Claire wasn't the type to pry. She believed in privacy, in trust. But this wasn't just privacy. It was secrecy. One night, as they prepared for bed, his phone buzzed with a message. Clara, half joking, asked who it was. The look Nathan gave her was cold, guarded. It froze the air between them. "Just work," he mumbled. then turned and walked away, and the distance between them kept growing. Nathan, once affectionate and warm, now recoiled from touch. He claimed he was exhausted, too much on his plate. Clara tried everything. She lit candles, made his favorite meals, even suggested a weekend escape to the mountains. But every effort was met with indifference, like he was there, but not really with her. When she finally voiced her concerns, hard on her sleeve, he laughed it off. "You worry too much," he said, patting her arm as if to soothe a child. "I love you, Clara. You're overthinking." But his words rang hollow, and Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping through the cracks. The confirmation didn't come with screaming or confessions. It came with a glance. At a glittering fundraiser for the Willow Ridge Children's Alliance, Clara spotted Nathan across the ballroom, standing near the champagne fountain. He was speaking with a tall blonde woman in a form-fitting scarlet dress. The woman's hand rested lightly on his arm, too familiar, too tender, and Nathan didn't pull away. Instead, he smiled. They laughed quietly, like they shared a secret. From across the room, Clara felt her stomach twist. The world around her blurred, the music, the chatter faded. She watched them for a long moment, frozen. Then, as if he sensed her eyes on him, Nathan straightened his posture and stepped back from the woman, his expression sharpening into something more professional. Still, the damage was done. On the drive home, silence stretched between them. Clara stared out the window, trying to gather courage. Finally, she spoke. "That woman in red? Who was she?" Nathan glanced over, something hard flickering in his eyes before it quickly vanished. "That's Juliet Carr," he said, as if the name should settle her unease. "She runs a marketing firm. My father's been talking about bringing her on board. Strictly business." The answer came too quickly, too polished, like it had been rehearsed. That night, Clara lay awake, her back to him, her mind racing. She stared at the ceiling, counting the seconds between each breath, wondering why her heart suddenly felt like it was bracing for a fall. And in the days that followed, the name Juliet kept surfacing. Again and again, Juliet Carr's name began to surface, more and more. First, it was a lunch meeting at some sleek new steakhouse downtown. Then, it was an urgent pitch at her firm's office. Each mention felt innocent on its own, but together, they began to carve out something more sinister, a shadow that crept slowly into Clara's peace of mind. It was like piecing together a puzzle she wished didn't exist. And with every piece, it became harder to deny that something between them was changing. And then, just as the ache in her chest became familiar, life surprised her with something she hadn't expected. During a routine checkup, one she had booked long before talks of starting a family felt real, Clara was met with news that left her breathless. She was pregnant. Her hands trembled as she held the results. 1,000 thoughts crashed into her at once. She had always dreamed of becoming a mother. The idea of holding a child, of building a home filled with gentle love, had lived quietly in her heart for years, but the timing, it felt cruelly complicated. Nathan's distance had become impossible to ignore. He was slipping away into his work, his silence, once, and possibly into someone else's arms. How would he react? Would this baby bring him back? Or would it push him further into the places Clara could no longer reach? She thought about telling him right away. She even rehearsed the words in the mirror. But each time, fear stopped her. What if he didn't want this child? What if he barely noticed? Or worse, what if he smiled out of obligation while hiding more secrets behind his tired eyes? Still, hope has a stubborn way of holding on. Clara told herself that maybe, just maybe, this was what they needed. They'd always talked about building a family, about raising a child with values, about creating something beautiful out of their love. Maybe the stress of work had just blurred his priorities. Maybe once he heard the news, something inside him would realign. She imagined it, a quiet dinner at their favorite Italian restaurant, flickering candlelight, the soft clink of plates. She would hand him a tiny box with a pair of baby shoes nestled inside. He would understand immediately. He'd reach for her hand, eyes wide with joy, and everything broken would begin to mend. That dream carried her through days filled with anxious waiting. But when the night finally came, reality tore the fantasy apart. Nathan didn't show up for dinner. In fact, he didn't come home until nearly 11. When he walked through the door, he was unshaven, his shirt wrinkled, and his skin carried a scent that wasn't hers. "Work ran late," he said casually, tossing his jacket onto the couch without looking at her. Clara, who had spent the entire evening preparing his favorite meal, sat in silence. The candles had long melted into waxy puddles. The pasta had gone cold, and the tiny baby shoes stayed hidden in her coat pocket, the secret pressing against her heart like a weight. Still she tried. She reached out, gently taking his hand. "Nathan, there's something I need to tell you," she whispered, her voice trembling with both hope and dread. He pulled his hand away. Without meeting her eyes, he rubbed his temples. "Can it wait?" he murmured. "I'm exhausted." And with that, the dream slipped away. Clara had clung to hope with both hands. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe he needed time. But in that moment, in the silence of their dimly lit living room, with his indifference still echoing in the air, she couldn't keep it inside any longer. Her hands shook as she reached into her coat pocket. Without a word, she pulled out the tiny pair of baby shoes and held them out to him. Her voice was barely more than a whisper, fragile and trembling. "I'm pregnant, Nathan." He stared at the shoes like they were some foreign object, like they didn't belong to him, or to the life they were supposed to be building together. There was a flicker in his eyes, surprise, perhaps even annoyance, before he masked it with a flat smile. "Wow," he murmured, his tone as empty as a hollow room. Then he leaned in, kissed her on the forehead like a stranger would, detached, automatic. That's good news, Clara." It wasn't joy. It wasn't wonder. It wasn't even relief. It was the bare minimum of acknowledgement. And Clara felt her heart crack. She had imagined tears in his eyes, a hand over his mouth, a rush of love and protectiveness. Instead, she stood alone with her shoes in her hands and a dream slipping away. Over the next few days, things didn't get better. They got worse. Nathan disappeared even more than before. Late meetings, sudden emergencies, phone calls behind closed doors. Clara watched the days pass like scenes from a play she wasn't part of anymore. Then, one afternoon, her phone rang. It was Margot, Nathan's mother. Clara had always liked Margot Sharp, elegant, never overly warm, but always respectful. That day, her voice was smooth and composed, too composed. "I heard the news. Congratulations," she said, as if reading from a script. And then, like someone tossing a pebble into a calm pond just to see what would surface, Margot added, "I do hope everything works out, dear. Nathan's been so busy lately. Especially with that new marketing collaboration, working closely with Juliet Carr, if the rumors are to be believed." Rumors. Clara's blood ran cold. She ended the call politely, even though her hands were trembling. Her mind began to spin. The late nights, the hidden phone, the sudden prominence of Juliet's name in every conversation, the perfume that didn't belong to her. The dots were no longer scattered. They were forming lines. And those lines drew only one conclusion. Her stomach churned. She barely made it to the bathroom before the nausea overtook her, not just from the pregnancy, but from the dread clawing at her insides. That evening, when Nathan finally walked through the front door, hours after dinner had gone cold, Clara was waiting. She stood in the living room, blocking his way, her eyes red but steady. I need you to tell me the truth, she said quietly, her voice trembling but firm. Are you having an affair with Juliet Carr? For a single, damning heartbeat, his expression betrayed him. There it was, guilt. But just as quickly it vanished. He straightened, his face hardening into something defensive, even disdainful. You're being ridiculous, he snapped. She's a colleague. My father has been pushing this expansion plan for months. I'm working. That's all this is. Clara didn't move. Then why, Huey, are you never here? She said, her voice catching. Why do you guard your phone like a secret? Why do you come home smelling like someone else's perfume? Even your mother. She all but confirmed it. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Nathan, I'm carrying your child. If something is going on, I deserve to know. Nathan's jaw clenched, and he exhaled sharply, as though the weight of being questioned was unbearable. You think being pregnant gives you the right to interrogate me? He snapped. You're tired, you're emotional, and you're making things up. His words cut like ice. There was no warmth, no apology, no attempt to comfort her. Then he walked past her, brushed her shoulder, like she wasn't even there, and disappeared into the bedroom, leaving Clara in the living room, alone. Tears finally fell silent, slow, and full of all the truths she had tried so hard not to see. The days that followed were heavy with silence, not the kind that comforts, but the kind that stretches between two people like an invisible wall. Clara moved through the house like a ghost, quietly observing, watching, listening. Nathan's phone buzzed, late at night, always face down, always silenced, his voice lowered whenever she walked into the room. Conversations that once flowed freely were now replaced by half-truths and clipped answers. And the name Juliet it surfaced too often, woven into every excuse, every late return home, every vague explanation about work. Clara tried to fight the sickness building inside her, not just the physical toll of pregnancy, but the ache of uncertainty. She still carried a whisper of hope that maybe she was wrong, that maybe he would come to her, confess everything, and choose to make it right. But hope can only hold out so long before it breaks. One Saturday afternoon, something inside Clara shifted. She reached for her car keys with hands that barely shook and followed him. Nathan had left in casual clothes, saying he had to meet a client. No suit, no briefcase. Just a quiet goodbye and the scent of something Clara didn't recognize. She waited a few minutes, then got into her car, her breath shallow, her heart pounding. She kept her distance as she tailed him through the winding roads of Willow Ridge until he pulled into the parking garage of a sleek, high-rise condo building overlooking the river. Clara parked a block away, her hands gripping the steering wheel. 15 minutes passed, then she saw it. From a fifth-floor balcony, Nathan emerged, not alone. Juliet stood beside him, laughing easily, her body leaning into his as if it belonged there. Nathan's arms found her waist without hesitation. She tilted her head onto his chest, fingers brushing over his heart, and just like that, the truth became undeniable. Clara lifted her phone with trembling hands and captured the scene, her vision blurred from tears, her chest tightening with every beat of her heart. The betrayal stung more sharply because she was carrying his child, because she had believed in him, because she had loved him, truly and deeply. But mixed with the pain was something else relief. No more guessing. No more lies. No more hope clinging to the wrong person. She drove away, with tears streaming down her face, the images burned into her mind. Her hands clenched the wheel, her sobs rising and falling like waves. She wanted to scream, she wanted answers, but not yet. The wound was too fresh to face him. She needed space to breathe, to feel. That night, alone in their quiet home, Clara stared at the photos on her phone. Proof. Her world was cracking beneath her, but she knew she had to stay steady for the life growing inside her. Whatever came next, she would no longer be the one left in the dark. This time, she would be in control of the story. In the days that followed, the house became eerily calm, too calm. Nathan moved like he didn't notice the storm gathering in her silence. But Clara noticed him, watching her from time to time, as if sensing something had shifted, as if he knew a reckoning was coming. Then one evening, without warning or apology, Nathan informed her they would be attending a business event that weekend, a formal function at a private estate just outside the city. He didn't ask. He told. The way he said it wasn't a request. It was a command. Something in his tone made her skin crawl. Something that whispered danger. Clara paused, but only for a breath. Then she nodded. She would go, but not to support him. She had her own reason now. If the truth was going to surface, let it surface where masks were worn and reputations mattered. In public, he wouldn't be able to twist her words or rewrite the narrative. She would walk into that estate, not as his wife, but as a woman, ready to reclaim her voice. And Nathan, he had no idea what was coming. Nothing could have prepared Clara for the depth of humiliation Nathan had orchestrated that night. The estate was vast, a sprawling mansion wrapped in ivy and secrets, owned by one of Nathan's longtime business partners. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above marble floors, and music drifted through the air like perfume. Clara walked in on Nathan's arm, her heart pounding beneath layers of silk. Her dress flowed gracefully, designed to embrace the gentle curve of her pregnancy. But grace was the last thing she felt. She scanned the room, recognizing a few familiar faces from Willow Ridge's polished elite executives in tailored suits, women in glistening gowns. And then, her eyes landed on her, Juliet Carr. She stood at the bar in a silver cocktail dress, clinging to every contour of her body, a glass of champagne in hand. She was radiant and smug. The moment their eyes met, Juliet's lips curled into something between a smile and a smirk. Clara's stomach clenched, her pulse quickened. The evening unfolded with painful elegance, courteous greetings, curated hors d'oeuvres, and a string quartet playing softly in the background. But something felt off. The room buzzed with an unspoken tension, as if everyone had been told a secret Clara hadn't heard. Whispers hushed when she passed. Glances darted her way, only to look quickly away. And then, the music stopped. At precisely 9 o'clock, Nathan stepped forward center stage, microphone in hand, Juliet gliding to his side. Clara's breath caught in her throat. He cleared his throat. "May I have your attention, please?" His gaze flickered toward Clara for the briefest second, cold, unreadable, before shifting back to the crowd. "As many of you know, I've been working hard to grow our business into new markets," he said, his tone formal, almost performative. "And in that journey, I've had the honor of collaborating with someone truly exceptional." He turned to Juliet, eyes softening. "Juliet Carr has brought not just innovation and insight to our team, but something even more meaningful to my life." Gasps echoed softly through the room. Clara's legs went numb. "And tonight," Nathan continued, reaching into his jacket, "I'd like to ask her a question that will define our future, both professionally and personally." Before Clara could process what was happening, he dropped to one knee. The world spun. "Juliet," he said, opening a small velvet box, "will you marry me?" Time stopped. The crowd fell silent. Juliet covered her mouth in a performance of surprise, then giggled. "Yes, Nathan," she beamed. "Of course I will." Applause broke out, hesitant and disjointed. Some guests clapped with enthusiasm. Others looked on in stunned disbelief. But Clara stood frozen. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Her face burned. The baby kicked, startled by her trembling body. This wasn't just betrayal. It was annihilation. And yet, From the ashes of that moment, something fierce rose inside her. Not despair, defiance. Clara stepped forward. The crowd parted, as if they felt the heat radiating from her. Nathan and Juliet turned, their smugness faltering as they saw her approach. For once, they didn't look victorious. They looked afraid. Clara's voice broke through the stunned silence like glass shattering on marble. Nathan. The name fell from her lips like a verdict, equal parts heartbreak and fury. What do you think you're doing? Clara's voice trembled, but her words cut through the silence like a blade. I'm your wife. I'm carrying your child. And you propose to another woman in front of me? The room fell utterly still. Guests glanced nervously at each other, some horrified, others pitying, a few shamelessly intrigued. But Clara didn't see them. She saw only Nathan, rising from one knee, his face hard and unbothered. We're done, Clara, he said, his tone flat, stripped of any emotion. You just refused to see it. Juliet and I are moving forward with our life together. I had to make it public. Everyone deserves to know the truth. Juliet, glowing under the chandelier's light, slipped her arm around his waist. The ring on her finger caught the light, gleaming like a mockery. Clara stared at it dizzy, disoriented, as if gravity had abandoned her. You coward, she whispered, her voice cracking with the weight of unshed tears. You couldn't even tell me in private. You dragged me here to destroy me. Nathan shrugged, eyes dull with arrogance. I don't owe you anything, he said coldly. Just sign the divorce papers when they arrive. Stop holding on to something that's been dead for a long time. And in that moment, Clara saw it clearly. This wasn't about love lost. This was about power, about humiliation. He didn't just want to leave her, he wanted to crush whatever strength she had left. But he had miscalculated. Clara lifted her chin, steadying her breath. Her tears hadn't stopped, but behind them now was steel. I will never forget this, she said softly, voice calm, controlled. You've shown everyone here exactly who you are, and I hope, truly, that you both get everything you deserve. She turned and walked away. The crowd parted, a ripple of stunned silence following her as she made her way to the doors. A few guests reached out, hands on her shoulder, eyes filled with sympathy. But she didn't stop. The weight of the betrayal followed her like smoke. When the doors shut behind her, it was as if the air itself changed. She slid into the back seat of a waiting taxi, ignoring the buzzing of her phone. Message after message lit up her screen, people wanting to explain, apologize, gossip. She silenced them all, one hand pressed gently over her belly. She had lost a husband, but she still had a child, and maybe, just maybe, a reckoning to deliver. In the days that followed, Clara disappeared into the walls of their home. The master bedroom became her cave of sorrow, the same room where she and Nathan had once whispered dreams about babies and beach vacations, about growing old together. Now it felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by broken promises and shattered illusions. She curled under the duvet, her body heavy with exhaustion and grief. As the memory of Nathan kneeling before Juliet played again and again in her mind, a cruel loop she couldn't shut off. Her phone kept buzzing. Friends, acquaintances, curious strangers who had once called themselves allies. Each notification was another reminder of her public unraveling. Eventually, Clara answered only one person, her younger sister, Eva. Soft-spoken, fiercely loyal, Eva came over without question. She sat beside Clara, rubbed her back, and said simply, "We'll get through this. You're stronger than you feel right now. And you have a baby to think about. Don't let what he did define what's next." Even with those words, even with Eva's support, Clara found simple tasks excruciating. Eating felt impossible. Sleep was broken and cruel. Every night she jolted awake, heart racing, her mind flashing back to that ballroom, to the applause, to the betrayal. And when the envelope came crisp and cold, bearing the name of Nathan's attorney, she held it for a long time without opening it. The pages inside would confirm what she already knew, but her response? That part? She would write on her own terms. Clara's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. The weight of what it represented was heavier than paper should be. This was real now. Nathan wasn't just leaving, he was erasing their marriage with the efficiency of a contract negotiation. Inside was a cold, clinical proposal, asset division, a pre-calculated monthly stipend, and a clause outlining financial support for their unborn child until adulthood. It was all carefully worded, wrapped in legal precision, and beneath it all, the unspoken message rang loud and clear. Take the money, disappear, stay silent. Clara felt bile rise in her throat. She wasn't naive. She knew she needed stability. Her job at a small nonprofit covered the basics, but barely stretched far enough for the demands of single motherhood. Rent, medical bills, childcare. Life in Willow Ridge wasn't cheap, and the cost of raising a child alone loomed like a shadow. For days, she hovered over the dotted line, pen in hand, the promise of security tempting her. But then she would remember that night, the glittering estate, the applause, Nathan kneeling in front of another woman, while she stood, carrying his child, invisible to him and the world. She remembered the flutter inside her belly, the baby's tiny kick, as if urging her not to fold. Clara finally set the papers aside. Not like this, she told herself. Not without a fight. She decided to speak to a lawyer. And that's when the most unexpected message came. A request to meet from Margot, Nathan's mother. Clara hesitated. She assumed Margot would be on her son's side, loyal to family, to legacy. But there was something different in her tone. A softness Clara hadn't expected. They met in a quiet cafe nestled in the old district of Willow Ridge. Margot arrived looking tired, her perfect hair and diamond necklace doing little to hide the sadness in her face. "Clara," she said gently, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "I'm so sorry for everything Nathan has done. I didn't raise him to be this cold." Her voice cracked. There were tears in her eyes, and Clara, despite everything, felt her own tears rise to meet them. "I want you to know," Margot continued, "you're still family to me, and if you ever need anything, I'll be here." Clara didn't know how to respond. Was it genuine, or just damage control? Still, a small part of her was grateful, if only because someone had finally acknowledged the cruelty she had endured. "Thank you," Clara whispered. "I appreciate your kindness. I don't want to cause problems. I just want peace." Margot nodded solemnly. "I understand, but please keep me informed about the baby. I want to be part of their life. And if you need someone good to represent you, I know a lawyer, someone completely independent from our family, someone who will protect your future." She handed Clara a business card, tucked inside a monogrammed envelope. They hugged awkwardly before parting. Clara left with mixed emotions relief, but also a lingering ache. Why now, she wondered. Why didn't Margot step in sooner? That night, back in the quiet of her home, Clara stood before the mirror. She barely recognized the woman staring back, tear-stained cheeks, weary eyes, and the growing curve of new life. But behind all that was strength. This wasn't going to be the end of her story, not this version of it. With steady hands, she picked up her phone, ignoring the voicemails filled with gossip and hollow sympathy. She scrolled until she found the number printed on Margot's card, and she dialed. Clara drew in a steady breath and pressed the call button. She was no longer dialing just for herself. She was doing it for the life growing inside her, for the future she still believed could be rebuilt from the ashes. That first meeting with attorney Rebecca Norris marked the turning point. Rebecca was every bit the fighter Clara had hoped for, sharp-tongued, silver-haired, dressed in a no-nonsense black blazer that seemed to declare she took no prisoners. Yet beneath her fierce exterior was a quiet warmth. When she looked at Clara, she didn't see a victim. She saw a woman ready to rise. What Nathan did, Rebecca said, flipping through the documents Clara brought, isn't just morally disgusting, it has legal consequences. Clara sat a little taller in her chair, publicly proposing to another woman while still legally married. Rebecca continued, "It may not carry the weight it once did in court, but trust me, this paints a powerful picture, and that can shift things in your favor." A spark lit in Clara's chest. She had feared Nathan's high-powered legal team would bulldoze her. But in Rebecca, she saw someone who didn't flinch, someone who knew how to stand her ground. Together, they crafted a strategy: fair child support, shared custody under Clara's terms, and perhaps even compensation for emotional damages. Most of all, Rebecca affirmed what Clara had already begun to realize deep down: signing that hush money settlement would have meant surrendering her voice. She hadn't done it, and now that choice mattered. Outside the legal world, Clara began reclaiming her life, piece by piece. Her job at the nonprofit had been fulfilling but no longer enough. She needed stability, security, and the kind of benefits that could truly support her child. Swallowing the lump in her pride, she updated her resume and began applying. Larger companies, better roles, broader horizons. The process was brutal. She sent out applications while battling waves of nausea. She smiled through interviews with a weighted heart. She waited and waited as rejections trickled in. But through it all, Eva, her sister, never let her face it alone. Eva brought meals, sat with Clara during quiet afternoons, and accompanied her to every doctor's appointment at Willow Ridge General Hospital. Hearing her baby's heartbeat each time reminded Clara of her why. And when the nurse whispered, "It's a girl," Clara broke down in grateful tears. In the shadows of betrayal, she had found her light, and as her belly grew, so did her determination. She confided in an old friend, Rachel, who now worked at a promising tech startup. One conversation led to another, and soon Clara was preparing for an interview, this time for an administrative manager position that came with better pay, a flexible schedule, and generous maternity benefits. The interview wasn't easy. The hiring manager spoke candidly about the challenges: tight timelines, coordination across departments, the need for relentless organization. But Clara didn't shrink from it. She leaned in, ready for the test. She walked out of that meeting, not with certainty, but with something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. And 1 week later, the offer came. Clara stared at the message on her screen, breath catching in her throat. A job, a new beginning. Not given, but earned. She accepted, her heart pounding, not with fear this time, but with possibility. Though nerves lingered, like a soft ache beneath the surface, Clara knew she had no choice but to move forward. Starting a new job while carrying a child wasn't easy, but it was brave. And bravery, she realized, wasn't about being fearless, it was about showing up anyway. On her first day, she was met not with judgment, but kindness. Her new boss, a composed woman with 2 children of her own, pulled Clara aside after their morning meeting. "I know this season of life is a lot," she said gently. "Let us know what you need. We're in your corner." For the first time in a long time, Clara exhaled without tension. While she settled into her new role, the divorce battle began to heat up. Rebecca filed papers, citing Nathan's very public affair. As expected, Nathan's attorneys responded with bluster and deflection. They painted Clara as cold, distant, as if she had somehow driven him into Juliet's arms. Reading their claims made Clara's blood boil, but instead of falling apart, she gathered those pages and used them as fuel. She poured her energy into building her case, showing up to every legal meeting armed with truth, dignity, and quiet fire. Her days became a delicate dance balancing spreadsheets at work, checking in with her OBGYN, and preparing for courtroom showdowns. But underneath the stress, something new began to grow inside her. Not just the baby, but a quiet, steady strength. She was no longer just surviving. She was rebuilding. In the background, whispers of Nathan's engagement spread through Willow Ridge's elite circles. Some of his old acquaintances reached out to Clara with murmured sympathy. Others went silent, unwilling to take sides. She learned quickly to curate her digital world, muting the noise, blocking toxicity, focusing on what mattered. She never aired her pain publicly. She didn't need to. Her grace was its own kind of response. One evening, after a long, draining day at the office, Clara curled up on the couch, scrolling through messages and unread work emails. Her thumb paused over an ad: prenatal yoga. Breathe, center, connect. On impulse, she signed up. At the first session, she felt out of place, surrounded by glowing women in pastel leggings, their laughter light, their pregnancies seemingly unburdened by trauma. But then, something shifted. As she moved through gentle poses, focusing on her breath and the life within her, something inside softened. A stillness she hadn't felt in months settled over her heart. She walked out of that class, not just lighter in her body, but in her spirit. That night, Clara opened her journal. She wrote not about Nathan, not about betrayal, but about hope, about the kind of life she wanted to create, one filled with honesty, with love, with resilience. She wrote to her daughter, her little girl, growing stronger each day. I promise to build a world for you that isn't ruled by fear or shame, she wrote. One where your worth is never tied to someone else's approval. Each entry became a vow. Each breath in yoga became a prayer. And with every passing week, Clara transformed pain into power. The scars were still there. So were the memories. But they no longer held the pen. Claire was writing her own story now. Clara had no way of knowing that life still had its own twists to deliver turns that, in time, would lead not only to healing, but to justice. Quietly, inevitably, the wheel was beginning to turn. Nathan and Juliet wasted no time parading their romance through every available spotlight. Their social media overflowed with curated snapshots, lavish dinners under chandeliers, champagne on rooftop terraces, and that ever-present engagement ring sparkling beneath perfectly angled lighting. To the world, they looked unstoppable, a modern power couple wrapped in silk and success. But behind closed doors, a different narrative had begun to unravel. Nathan's father, Gerald, a stoic, reputation-driven man, had been fuming since the night Nathan humiliated Clara in front of the city's elite. He had kept most of his anger hidden, but the damage was undeniable. Whispers turned into headlines, and headlines stirred boardroom unease. Juliet, eager to make her mark, charged into the family's automotive empire with bold ideas. She pitched flashy rebrands, luxury showrooms, and high-gloss ad campaigns. Gerald, pragmatic to his core, listened. But his eyes were sharp with doubt. Her visions sounded like vanity wrapped in strategy. Nathan, desperate to prove that leaving Clara had been a choice worth making, granted her every request: budget increases, executive titles, even her own design team. At first, Juliet soaked in the attention, proclaiming she would revolutionize the brand. But ambition, unchecked, became appetite. And appetite comes with cost. The numbers didn't lie. Profits slowed, Expenses surged. Investors murmured their concerns. Gerald began raising pointed questions at meetings about overspending, about direction, about who was truly calling the shots. Nathan defended Juliet in public, but at home, pressure mounted. Their picture-perfect life frayed at the seams. Juliet began lashing out. When Nathan stayed late at work, she accused him of neglect. When he hesitated to fund another one of her projects, she called him ungrateful. Her demands grew louder. More gifts, more praise, more of everything. The romance that once looked effortless became a battlefield of blame. Without Clara, the anchor he once took for granted, Nathan floundered. His stress showed in sleepless nights, sharp words, and the weariness etched beneath his designer suits. The whispers began again, only this time. They weren't about Clara. In Willowridge's polished circles, people began to question Juliet's motives. Was she ever in it for love? Or had she seen Nathan as a stepping stone to status? Some speculated her vision for the company was little more than a mask for greed. Others believed Nathan had been blinded by pride, rushing into something that never had a foundation. But Nathan and Juliet refused to admit any cracks. Instead, they doubled down, planning a wedding fit for royalty. Designer gowns, imported orchids, a performance by a chart-topping pop star. The cost ballooned, the pressure mounted, and the mask they wore in public became heavier with each passing week. Behind the glamour, reality grew darker. Gerald demanded full financial transparency. Investors sent formal requests for expense audits. The company's polished surface began to fracture. And Nathan? He found himself trapped in the very world he thought he wanted, scrambling to manage perceptions, hold the center, and keep Juliet's wrath at bay. What he didn't realize was this: the cracks were only beginning. The house of cards he built on betrayal and pride was teetering. And karma was just getting started. While Clara quietly prepared for the arrival of her child, far away from the noise of high society, the glittering facade that Nathan and Juliet had built began to crumble under its own weight. It started with whispers, then a quiet audit. Gerald, Nathan's father, had grown increasingly suspicious of the lavish budgets being approved under Juliet's visionary marketing strategy. He ordered a full review of the dealership's finances quietly, discreetly. What the auditors found was damning. Inflated invoices, mysterious vendor contracts, lavish expenses disguised as campaign costs, luxury travel, designer wardrobes, high-end dinners with no clear business purpose. And the trail? It all led back to Juliet's marketing division. When confronted, Juliet played the part of the misunderstood innovator. It was a mix-up, she claimed. Poor communication, simple clerical errors. But Gerald wasn't buying it. My son may be blind, he snapped in a tense meeting with Nathan and Juliet, but I'm not. This company is my life's work, and I will not watch it fall apart for the sake of someone else's vanity. Nathan, caught between his fiancée and his furious father, tried to mediate, insisting it was all a misunderstanding. But Gerald was done listening to excuses. Legal counsel confirmed the stakes. If the misuse of company funds became public, the damage to their reputation and investor trust could be catastrophic. And then the final straw fell. One night, a brand new luxury vehicle vanished from the flagship showroom. At first, everyone assumed it was an external theft, but the security footage said otherwise. The thief was methodical, unlocking the doors with practiced ease. Moments later, the car was seen being handed off to someone who drove it to a private lot registered under Juliet's name. No official charges were filed, but the speculation was enough to set off alarm bells across the board. Rumors of fraud, whispers of calculated schemes, and in the investor community, confidence began to shatter like glass. Juliet's grand wedding plans, once a spectacle in the making, began to unravel. Vendors demanded overdue payments. The planner threatened to cancel unless balances were settled. Nathan scrambled, draining personal savings and even attempting to dip into business accounts. That was Gerald's limit. He froze the company's access, cutting Nathan off from the family funds. What followed were explosive confrontations, father against son, fiancé against fiancé. Gerald issued an ultimatum: control this chaos, or you're out for good. And for Juliet, the illusion of endless wealth snapped. You lied to me, she screamed during a bitter argument in the dealership's main office, within earshot of stunned employees. You made me believe I was walking into a life of abundance. Now I'm some second-rate girlfriend pinching pennies for a wedding that might never happen, Nathan. Never good at managing pressure, especially without Clara's grounding presence, exploded in return. This is your fault, he shouted. You've bled this company dry with your delusions of grandeur. You wanted to play CEO, but all you've done is wreck everything my family built. And just like that, the mask they had so carefully worn for the world charming, powerful, invincible began to slip for good. They had spent so long trying to win the world's admiration. But in the end, all they had built was an empire of ego, and it was starting to burn. Their fights became routine. What was once a luxury condo with floor-to-ceiling windows and curated decor had become a battlefield, echoing with accusations, slammed doors, and cold silences that stretched into days. The dream life Nathan and Juliet had broadcast so confidently to the world had rotted from the inside out. And then, karma struck with a twist. Clara herself would never need to deliver because life had a way of balancing the scales. It came in the form of a message, a simple buzz on Juliet's phone. Nathan, half curious and half distracted, picked it up to check a vendor confirmation. What he found instead unraveled everything. Flirtatious texts, references to late-night meetings, a not-so-subtle thread of innuendo between Juliet and a man rumored to be a venture capitalist she'd been courting for her next set of marketing deals. One message read, "If things line up, I won't be tied to this forever." Another, Jason served his purpose. Rage overtook him. He confronted her that night, phone in hand, eyes blazing. "I gave up everything for you," he shouted. "My family, my name, my wife. And this whole time you were lining up your next opportunity?" Juliet didn't flinch. She rolled her eyes. "Don't be naive," she said. "If you had delivered what you promised, I wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere. I'm not going down with a sinking ship." What followed was explosive. Shouts, accusations, Juliet packing her things in furious haste. She slammed the door behind her, and just like that, the wedding was off. Nathan, shaking with rage, demanded she return every dollar she had drained from the dealership. She laughed in his face. "You really want to play that game?" she said. "You think I don't have dirt on you, too?" She hinted at shady business decisions, misfiled contracts, tax gray areas Nathan had overlooked or signed off on in a haze of arrogance. The threat was enough to silence him. By the time she was gone, Nathan stood alone in the condo, once a symbol of his victory, now a monument to everything he had destroyed. His father's warnings now echoed louder than ever. The empire Nathan had once expected to inherit stood on crumbling ground, and he had no one to blame but himself. In that silence, he remembered Clara, the look on her face the night he proposed to Juliet, the pain he caused, the child he had cast aside like an inconvenience. Now he saw it all, clearly, sickeningly. The house of cards had collapsed, and as if fate had been waiting for just the right moment, karma rang its final bell. While Nathan sat alone in the ruin of his ego, Clara brought Wadiant, new life into the world. After 18 long, intense hours of labor, she gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She named her Aurora, Latin for dawn, a name that meant light, renewal, and everything Clara had fought to reclaim. Her sister Eva never left her side, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, wiping the sweat from her brow through every contraction. When Aurora let out her first cry, Clara dissolved into tears. Not from pain, but from the overwhelming flood of love, relief, and purpose. This was her beginning, her victory, her redemption. In the days that followed, Clara brought her daughter home to a modest but warm apartment she had made into a sanctuary. It didn't have chandeliers or designer decor, but it had peace. It had safety. It had the kind of love that couldn't be bought or betrayed. And in Clara's arms, little Aurora slept unaware that her very existence had already begun to rewrite the ending to a story once filled with sorrow. Clara had recently moved into a small apartment closer to her new job. It wasn't grand. The walls were plain, the furniture modest, but it was hers, and most importantly, it was safe. A few of her colleagues from the tech startup dropped by with gifts, tiny baby socks, diapers, thoughtful cards, and a crowd-funded basket filled with essentials. As they cooed over Aurora and shared quiet encouragement, something inside Clara softened. For the first time since her world had fallen apart, she didn't just hope for a better future. She believed in one. Meanwhile, the divorce proceedings neared their conclusion. Thanks to Rebecca's unrelenting legal strategy, combined with Nathan's very public implosion, Clara held the upper hand. When his lawyers made one final attempt to challenge her fitness as a parent citing finances, emotional stability, Rebecca countered with clarity and facts. Clara had steady employment, a clean, nurturing home, and most importantly, she had built a life centered around her daughter's well-being. The court took note not only of the evidence, but of the emotional toll Clara had endured, the betrayal, the humiliation, the strength it took to stand again. In the end, Clara was granted full primary custody. Nathan was ordered to provide substantial child support. Word came through mutual connections that Nathan's financial situation had grown dire. Gerald had locked down his access to the family's shared assets, forcing him to rely on a modest personal salary. The penthouse was gone. Juliet had vanished. Rumors whispered she'd fled the city entirely, possibly to dodge legal consequences. Whatever safety net Nathan had once relied on had unraveled. Then, one quiet afternoon, Clara heard a knock at the door. She wasn't expecting anyone. Cradling Aurora in her arms, she peeked through the peephole. Her breath caught. It was Nathan. His hair was tousled, his shoulders slumped, his face carried weeks of regret. Despite the storm of emotions that surged in her chest, Clara opened the door just a few inches. The chain latch stayed in place. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Her voice was steady, cool, but not cruel. Nathan looked up, his eyes hollow. "I came to see my daughter," he said softly, "and to talk to you." Legally, he had limited visitation rights structured, supervised, controlled. He wasn't due to see Aurora today. Clara could have closed the door. She had every reason to. But something in her heart whispered that maybe someday Aurora would want to know who her father was. After a long pause, Clara unlatched the door. Nathan stepped into the small apartment, his presence unsure, like a man walking through someone else's life. He glanced around the baby blanket on the couch, the soft hum of lullaby music, sunlight pouring through gauzy curtains. Then his eyes landed on the infant in Clara's arms. He blinked. Tears filled his lashes. "She's beautiful," he whispered. Clara nodded, and after a hesitant moment, she gestured toward the couch. He sat down, hands folded tightly in his lap. He didn't ask to hold her, but he looked at Aurora like he was seeing something pure for the first time in his life. Clara watched him closely. Every instinct in her was alert. Still, after a moment, she carefully placed Aurora in his arms. Nathan held her like something fragile, a tiny weight, a second chance. Tears rolled freely down his cheeks as he looked into his daughter's sleeping face. And when he finally looked up at Clara, his voice cracked. "I'm sorry," he said, "for everything, for what I did to you, for what I gave up, for who I became." "I'm sorry," Nathan repeated, voice catching in his throat, "for the way I hurt you, for abandoning you, for not being there during your pregnancy." Clara stood with her arms folded, watching him carefully. There had been a time late at night, during her loneliest moments, when she imagined this exact scene, Nathan apologizing, regretting everything. But now that the moment was real, it felt distant, like a story she had once lived, but no longer belonged to. "I can't change the past," she said softly, her voice calm and unwavering, "and neither can you. My focus now is Aurora. She's what matters." Nathan nodded, eyes brimming with regret. He asked if there was a chance they could start over. "Try again?" Clara felt the familiar ache in her chest, but this time it didn't hollow her out. It steadied her. "We're far beyond that," she replied gently. "The divorce is final. You have responsibilities now as a father. I truly hope you'll honor them. But us? There is no going back." He didn't argue. Perhaps he finally understood. He held Aurora a moment longer, brushing a hand across her cheek, then passed her back to Clara. Before leaving, he asked if he could visit again according to the schedule. Clara nodded, offering a polite goodbye. She stood by the window, watching as Nathan walked away. His shoulders were slumped. The confident strut he once wore, like armor, was gone. And in that quiet contrast, Clara saw everything clearly. She felt a flicker of sadness for what could have been, but far stronger was the quiet triumph blooming in her chest. She had survived. She had rebuilt. She had become someone stronger than she ever imagined, someone who didn't need revenge, only peace. Because real victory wasn't in watching Nathan fall. It was in holding her daughter close in a home filled with light and laughter, and knowing deep down she had already won. The revenge, if it could be called that, was in her serenity, in her joy, in the life she had built from ashes. While Nathan faced the ruins of what might have been, Clara held in her arms everything that truly mattered. Aurora, hope, freedom. Sometimes the universe doesn't just heal, it rewrites the ending. Not with rage, but with renewal. Nathan and Juliet had chased power, fueled by ego and greed, and in the end, were undone by their own choices. Clara had faced heartbreak with grace, rebuilt her life brick by brick, and found joy not in retaliation, but in rebirth. By the time Nathan realized what he had lost, the door to reconciliation had already closed, and that was more than enough. If this journey touched your heart, if Clara's quiet courage reminded you that healing is possible, even after the deepest wounds, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need it today, and subscribe to Shining Stories. Your support helps us bring more stories of resilience, hope, and the quiet strength of the human spirit to life. From our hearts to yours, thank you for watching. And remember, sometimes the most beautiful beginnings come after the most painful goodbyes.